Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 30th episode of the Manor Podcast. I'm your co-host, Roger Bodee, joined as always with my best friend and other co-host, Michael Hamilton. Michael, a wise man once said, "There's so much to do and so much to see, so what's wrong with taking the back streets?" So I'm going to ask you, what's wrong with taking the back streets?
I don't know.
Well, you'll never know if you don't go.
What's wrong with taking the back streets?
Well, you'll never shine if you don't glow.
Oh, I know that song. It's the Shrek song.
Some might say that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So would you rather be an all-star or a rock star?
I don't know.
Well, you're clearly an all-star in Flesh and Blood. You don't play musical instruments very well, so it's hard to call you a rock star.
Is that an all-star if I'm a star of a singular game?
Yeah, usually. I think so.
Okay.
You're the all-encompassing star of Flesh and Blood.
Okay.
That's what it means to be the world champion, I think, at least.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So do you want to spend the whole episode talking about the nuances of the philosophical meaning of Smash Mouth's classic hit All-Star, or do you want to talk about Flesh and Blood limited design?
I'd rather talk about Flesh and Blood limited design. You said
Okay.
You called me an all-star, but I feel like definitely only feel that way about Flesh and Blood. So talking about not Flesh and Blood doesn't seem great.
I could have gone either way, so I'm happy you picked Flesh and Blood.
I'm sure.
So I guess there's a new set that was announced recently, Outsiders, and from what the rumors on the internet are, it's supposed to be the best Flesh and Blood limited set since Welcome to Wraith. So that means that in public perception, at least, all the limited sets since Welcome to Wraith haven't been as good. So we wanted to talk about what we liked and haven't liked about the previous sets, limited wise, and what we really hope Outsiders will bring to the table.
Yeah. Though I will have to admit, I feel like I haven't given Arcane Rising and Monarch really their fair shakes. I haven't gotten to draft either format. I've played some sealed of both, but are you in the same boat?
Yeah. That's actually one of my questions, though. So we can start there, though. So
okay.
It's pretty noticeable, though, that the limited formats for, I guess, callings, nationals, and worlds, pro tours, all that stuff, it always focuses on draft. And there really haven't been very many sealed Flesh and Blood events at all. I think there was one Tales of Aria calling, and that's the only one that I can really think of.
I think there were 2 Tales of Aria callings.
Okay.
But yeah.
Do you think that's just going to continue to be the primary focus, and would you like to see more focus on sealed again?
Yeah, I think if we get a limited calling, I'd expect them to stick with the day 1 sealed, day 2 draft. And I think like a lot of their draft, a lot of their recent sets have been more focused on draft, like both Aria and Uprising. When you play the draft format, if for the most part, it feels pretty good. Like the heroes feel like at least like reasonably balanced, and the games when you draft, you can make some pretty functional decks and pretty solid decks. But like we've played a lot of Tales of Aria sealed, and the amount of time we'd open a sealed deck and be like, this is a Lexi pool was pretty close to 0. And sometimes we're like, this probably isn't a Lexi pool, but if anything's going to be a Lexi pool, this is it. And we tried the Lexi pool and it still wasn't good. So it's not like we're giving her a shot. It's just Lexi and sealed just like wasn't very playable. And I haven't played a lot of Uprising sealed, but my kind of understanding is that Dromai is very bad in Uprising sealed because everyone has 6 packs worth of poppers. And also you don't have, like when you're playing Dromai in draft, you need to get a high red count for your deck to function. And it's a lot harder to get a focused deck around what you're trying to do in sealed compared to draft.
Yeah, and there's a common element to kind of what you were talking about there, where the sets with talented heroes, at least, obviously introduce the second stratification of the hero base between the classes and the talents. And then I guess then also within those subtext, there's also the third stratification of their strategy. So not only, like you said, does Dromai want draconic dragons, but she wants red draconic dragons with a lot of go again effects, and it's hard to get a concentrated amount of those effects within 6 booster packs. Whereas, I guess like the best sealed format is going to be obviously Welcome to Wraith, and so that puts it in the best limited category from both sealed and draft, in my opinion. Then, and that's because the only stratification there really is just the classes. So it's pretty easy, and I think we've had this before, where you could even have like a Bravo pool where you're happy to put Snapdragon scalers in it because you just have this interesting deck where you have lots of little cost things and you can still swing Anathos sometimes with a blue for 4, but that's not like the primary focus of your deck, and you can still kind of go like little Bravo, which isn't really a thing you can do in other limited formats, I guess.
Yeah. Nimblism and a Nimble Strike and a Swing Anathos for 6. Classic.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's so that's like the first primary like thing I'd be cautious of. So how do you think the talent system could be adapted in Outsiders to kind of like alleviate kind of what we've seen in the past few sets?
So I think we've had 3 talented limited sets. We've had Monarch, which I haven't had enough experience with to really have a lot of takeaways from it. We had Arya, which I think the talents were like not really. I think the talents actually worked super well in Tales of Aria. I think like the way that most of the cards were playable in 2 of the 3 characters, or basically all the talented cards were playable in 2 of the 3 characters. I think it led to a really interesting draft format, and I think if it was balanced a little better for sealed where Lexi wasn't so bad, I think the format would have actually been very good. And then you have Uprising, where everything that says ice on it is an Icelander card, and a lot of the Draconic cards were, yes, you could play them in Fi or Dromai, but a lot of them just ended up bad or only good in 1. I guess like it was really hard to make cards like Flame Call Awakening work in your Dromai deck, and that card was great in 5, but pretty mediocre in Dromai. So I guess if everything that is talented kind of is only works for 1 character, you'd think it'd kind of be more like Welcome to Wraith, where everyone just like has their class cards. But the problem with Uprising, in my opinion, was it was like that, where basically everything only went in 1 deck, except like a few notable exceptions, like Sasha Sandakai went in both Fi and Dromai. But for the most part, everything went in 1 deck, except the generics, and there just weren't a lot of generics. And I think that's part of why the talent, I don't know if it's the talent system that really is at fault for that, but I think as long as the way they do the talent system, if it's more like Aria, where there's like crossover where every card's playable in or a lot of the talented cards are playable in half or more than half of the decks, I think it'll be a lot more interesting than maybe Uprising was.
Yeah, and I guess if we're comparing and contrasting Dynasty to the other talented limited formats, so there's Monarch, where the 2 talents were Light and Shadow, and then you had 2 heroes in each category of Light and Shadow. So there was crossover between the 2 Light heroes and then crossover between the 2 Shadow heroes, and different Light and Shadow cards played differently within those 2 hero categories, but obviously you couldn't mix and match between those 2 talents. And then the individual class cards were a lot of the time then also stratified as like light warrior. A lot of the time there weren't a lot of just like generic warrior, generic illusionist, generic like. So the stratification wasn't felt as much in that limited format, at least from the experiences we've had. But if we look back to Arya, technically there was 1 talent in that set, and it was Elemental. So like Elemental, I think, is like the talent or whatever, and then you get to the stratification of like what element you are from Elemental. But each one of those heroes were 2 out of the 3, obviously elements in that set. So that means you could comfortably pick a first, like an Earth card first, and be like, well, okay, well, I am either Oldheim this pick puts me in the lane of Oldheim or Briar. But that doesn't mean that you then couldn't take an ice card second, and then you're like, okay, well, now I'm have a card for Oldhim, Briar, and Oldhim Lexi. So it's a lot easier to kind of start flexing and pivoting your picks from there. Whereas in Uprising, if you take a Draconic card, you're taking it for 2 out of the 3 heroes, and then literal old Icelander sitting over here like, I can't do anything with this card. So I think that was the biggest awkward pain point in Dynasty for me, was just how out of place Icelander felt. And I'm curious to see if they will keep putting in, I guess, like, if they want to keep putting in talents that aren't native to like the region, I think that makes sense. But I don't think you can just kind of like put in one subtype of that talent. I think you kind of want to balance it out a little bit better.
Yeah, that's fair. And I guess it's hard to give too much criticism, I feel like, towards Uprising, because I think the limited games actually played very well. I just think like the drafting process was pretty bad. And there's other things you can kind of point fingers at that might have also led to that, like the 14 cards instead of 15 cards, meaning you just like had to find your lane because you're going to have 3 less cards basically every draft.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess to supplement that, there was the Phoenix Flames as well as the token Heliod's Miter piece of equipment. How did you feel about having just like a starting piece of token equipment off to the side for like a limited format?
I actually thought, when I first heard about Heliod's Miter, I'm like, this is kind of dumb. Why are we going to have any equipment that just starts there? But the way it actually played out, I think it was a very important piece of the puzzle to making like Icelander at a fair power level, and also kind of saving most heroes that pick on taking a hat. Though if you were Icelander, you still had to use a pick to get your glacial horns, which was tough, especially when you're the class or the character that doesn't get Phoenix Flames. So you still needed your 30 cards and your 4 equipment. And it was really hard, like you were talking about earlier, with hedging between being Icelander and the Draconic cards, the Draconic heroes, because if you picked an Icelander card, it couldn't be played to anyone else. And there was like Poppers and Red Scar for a Scar, and everything else was Icelander only. So
yeah.
But I would say that, I guess, jumping back to your question, that I think Heliod's Miter did play very well, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them do something like that again. I think it was good.
Okay. We also saw for the first time in Uprising as well, no draftable equipment in the set. So I guess Welcome Wraith didn't have draftable weapons, I should say.
Weapons.
Yeah, sorry, I said equipment. Draftable weapons. So obviously in Tales of Aria, if you were in Oldhim and you had Winter's Wail with like the ice cards to support it, then like you were just at a significant advantage in that format, as well as kind of like Bolton with Raiden. Like he played significantly more powerfully than Bolton with the axes, obviously, because instead of having to pay resources to swing with your weapons, you then just got to do it for free. So that seems a lot better of a cost. So do you like the fact that there aren't like majestic or like higher rarity weapons that can kind of add that element of variance, or do you think it could be done right?
Yeah. My only real experience with this is Aria. And in Aria, I think the draftable weapons were not good for the format. Like when you had Winter's Will in your Oldhim deck, your deck was just like I think I would take Winter's Will over most legendaries in that format. It just like is so powerful, I guess. Just like first making your Titan's Fist never swing for 3, just the fact that it always swings for 4 no matter what card you pitch. And then also like that Frostbite on hit is really strong. And I think that Oldhim with Winter's Will is probably the best deck by a reasonable amount in that format. If you like, that's probably the biggest bomb. And I don't think that's healthy to have cards that are that bomby. And it did kind of warp your drafting a little bit when you had it, but it wasn't in an interesting way. It's just like, I need blue ice cards now so I can swing my Winter's Will. And I don't need the big blue 3-block Guardian attacks because they don't swing Winter's Will as well as ice cards do.
Yeah, I was just going to say that thinking about it too, Winter's Wail is just strictly better than Titan's Fist even when you don't have ice cards, because it just always swings for 4. And I realized that, oh yeah, some of the time, I guess like you never want to be doing this, but unless you're pitching a cost with 3 or greater thing for Titan's Fist. You're only swinging 3 damage, where Winter's Wail is just like, just give me an evil blue and I'll come in for 4 damage at least. So it was just like a strictly better card to have in Oldheim 100% of the time. Whereas Duskblade was not very good.
Yeah, I think it was probably wrong to ever put Duskblade in a deck. There might be some situation where your Oldheim opponent has like multiple rejuvenates or something, and they're trying to hard fatigue you, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna Duskblade is gonna get all these counters because they have no way to pressure me at all. Then maybe it would be better to play Duskblade, but like Rosetta Thorn just like was better than Duskblade.
There was no arcane barrier.
So
it was just 2 free damage every time you swung it. I guess there are Earth React things you could do, but like still, like it was still really hard to play around Rosetta Thorn in that format.
Yeah.
I guess. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think Winter's Will is kind of like really bad for the draft format, but Rosetta Thorn is also not great.
True. So I guess let's talk about arcane damage in a format then. So I guess in Tales of Aria, infamously, there was no arcane barrier at common. There was, I think the only piece of arcane barrier was the legendary chess piece Heart of Ice, which was interesting.
Yeah.
And then there wasn't a lot of arcane barrier in Uprising. There was the common wizard chess piece, but there was the supplemental mechanic of Quell, which kind of let you hedge between the physical and arcane damage. Do you think that arcane damage is hard to balance for a limited format, or do you think it just needs to be handled very carefully?
Yeah, I really wish I had more experience with Arcane Rising like drafts, because
we're not talking about Arcane Rising for a reason.
Because I feel like from the sample size of Briar and Icelander as the only 2 heroes I've really played with that dealt arcane damage in limited, I think like it's kind of hard to say what the correct answer is. I think like if Rosetta Thorn was tuned down a little bit, I think Briar's arcane damage probably would have been fine. And I think the way they did Icelander here, where everyone gets Arcane Barrier 1 at common and they don't have the Null Rune equipment at all, and they have Quell. I still feel like this draft format played really well. And I think like it did kind of lead to a spot where like you need those Arcane Barrier equipments against Icelander, but if you didn't have Silent Stilettos and you're playing a Dromai Mirror or Dromai into Fi, it doesn't feel like it matters. But if you don't have them into Icelander, it's like huge.
Yeah.
I didn't really like that, where the cards are like that polarized sometimes. And I imagine Arcane Rising had a similar thing where Null Rune, your first piece of Null Rune was great against Viscerai, and every Null Rune you could get was great against Kano.
Yeah, and then they all had the rare Spell Void pieces of equipment in that set too, which was also an interesting place for those pieces of equipment to exist.
Was the Spell Void in those? I thought it was in like Blitz decks.
There were Spell Void in Arcane Rising.
Okay. I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
weird.
Yeah, I think we got a box of Arcane Rising, or maybe we did like a couple boxes, maybe 2 or 3, or like. But I think after like our second box of Arcane Rising Limited, we were like, "Would you ever play Kano or Azalea?" And we were like, "No," and then we didn't play it again.
Well, I think part of that was also you ran pretty hot on opening Command and Conquer, so you didn't really need to buy more.
Oh, and Art of Wars too, yeah, importantly.
So
I was busted from like a Majestic level.
But yeah, I think we also had one sealed where one of us had an induction chamber, and then that also kind of made it much less enjoyable.
It's just like, did you open an induction chamber? Yes. Okay, well, next pool. Let's move on. Oh, well.
I imagine the draft format was... I hope the draft format was better, and I would like to try it at some point. But
yeah, it's hard for it to be worse, that's for sure. But I guess so. Importantly, though, Arcane Rising is the only other set aside from Welcome to Wraith that has 4 heroes, though. So do you hope Outsiders has 4 heroes? Have you liked 3 heroes? Or
Monarch also had 4.
Oh, yeah, Monarch did have 4. I always forget about Levia being in that set. That's where she is. So I guess, how do you think 4 heroes versus 3 heroes compares for like a limited format? Do you think it like, because if classes are also a further stratification, you would think that three heroes would open things up more, but I don't think that that's necessarily the case.
Yeah, it's weird because I think Welcome to Wraith is the best limited format and it has 4 heroes, but I also kind of like, maybe it's because Tales of Aria was what we started with and what we played so much of, but I'm just like, that felt like a very good recipe, and like I still think the balance was off, but I think the recipe there of having the 3 heroes with some overlap worked really well. And maybe a 4 hero thing where there is some overlap between characters in ways other than just like how Monarch did it, how it had 2 light and 2 dark. I'd like to see, if they're doing 4 heroes, I'd like to see them like experiment with other kinds of overlap that make more cards playable in more decks.
Yeah, definitely. So, and I don't think that even needs to be like a talent system per se, but and you also don't have to dilute it with generics, because I know generics come with their own can of worms where not only for limited purposes, but anytime you print a strong generic, that means lo and behold, every single deck in any format ever can play that card. So I think they really want to start tempering down how impactful they make generics going forward as the game expands. But there could be just kind of like an overarching sub theme. I don't know, but obviously I haven't like given this a lot of thought. But even, or I guess like even if they just did what like we saw with the Emperor, I think the Emperor actually opens up like really interesting design space with like warrior ninjas or stuff like that. Like combining classes and talents, I think could be like a really interesting way to start giving more flexibility to heroes in limited.
Yeah, definitely. I was gonna say, well, I think that does seem really cool if they do like dual classes, because like if you had like a light and dark, or if you had like 2 light heroes and 2 dark heroes, and one of the light and one of the dark is a warrior, and the other light and the other dark is like a ninja, but maybe they're like double class, like one of the light ones like a war. I don't know.
There's so much design space that I think is like opened up with like the introduction of the Emperor, and it's a shame that the Emperor is not like a little bit better, but it's also one of those things where he's a legendary hero, so they probably didn't want him to be busted, because then it's just a paywall behind one of the best heroes in Blitz. So it makes sense that they kind of designed it to be more cool and interesting than powerful. But who knows? Maybe he is actually busted. We just haven't found the right build.
Yeah, it is kind of difficult in another sense that like if you're making these dual class heroes, you have to make sure they're not broken and class constructed. And if it leads to a good limited format, but class constructed only sees these 4 heroes for the rest of time, then it's hard to call it a win overall. But another direction they could go is something like how in Welcome to Wraith they had like the big attacks package and the little attacks package, where Welcome to Wraith had like Slogism and Pummel and stuff that was like decks that wanted a lot of resources and to play big things could do like Slogism regurgitating a slog, and they had Pummel, and then they also had Goliath Gauntlet, and then it also had the little attacks. It had Razor Reflex, and it had the Nimblism Nimble Strike combo, and it also had Snapdragon Scalers, and like that was ways to have overlap where like Dorinthia and Katsu usually had overlap in the small attacks, and Bravo and Reinar had overlap in the big attacks, but you could still sometimes just be like, well, my Katsu deck's going to play 4 big attacks, a Pummel and a Goliath Gauntlet because I didn't get the ninja gloves or whatever. And it would work fine. And I think that was kind of a cool thing that had overlap, but it naturally fit in some heroes to play them, but it wasn't like other heroes couldn't do it as well. So
yeah, there was some of that going on in Monarch as well, now that I'm thinking about it, where I guess how they designed it, now that I'm thinking about it, they had a little light and a little shadow warrior in Bolton and Chain, and then they had a big light and a big shadow in Levia and Prism, and then that's where you had Belittle Minnowism. I don't remember what the big stuff matter was from that format, but I'm sure it's there.
was it Zealous Belting?
Oh, Zealous Belting. Yeah. So that's kind of how they balanced that out. And I think in draft that would have been really interesting, because I guess even in like each one of the sub heroes too, you still had cards like Bolting Blade out of Bolton that could have been like, okay, so now I'm big Bolton. And maybe there's like little Prism, or maybe there's some version of Levia that's playable. Who knows? Then maybe that format's way more interesting than we've given it credit for. And it's a shame, just given the circumstances of the world, didn't allow us to explore it more, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think the power level of Little Minnowism is very different from whatever the big stuff was in that format, unless there's something happening that I'm not aware of. But I do wish we got to play with it more, and maybe we should try to get a group together and draft some Monarch and some Arcane Rising sometime, and just
I think I definitely have some number of Monarch cases over there. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I guess it doesn't matter anymore because all the prices collapse anyways. I think it's mostly first edition, but if those boxes aren't worth anything anyways, sure, we can bust one open sometimes and get a draft going.
Cool. I'm always down for drafting.
Yeah, it's the only way I can lure you out to our local game store.
It's not that local for me. It's like 20 some minutes away. It's so far.
We live 10 minutes away from each other. It's the same drive for both of us. I'm there every Monday. You don't get that excuse anymore. You can't say it's too far away from me, because if it's too far away from you, it's too far away from me, buddy. Nice try.
Even when I did go to draft, I had to leave early still.
Yeah, that's not because of distance. That's because of Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, if it was in my backyard, I could have played round 3 and been on time for Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay, I'll build a game store in your backyard.
I don't know if I want that either.
Okay. Anyways, so also as we were talking, I don't know why this popped in my head, but how do you feel about a ranger assassin Azalea? Because isn't Azalea like, she has like all of those like Red in the Ledger and all of those like Contract X cards, it feels like, now that I'm thinking about it. Like, this is like completely free-formed spitballing off the top of my head and like headshot, and she feels very assassin-y, like in like some of her cards. I don't know, like I'm kind of interested in like a ranger assassin Azalea now. How is that thought hitting you? This might be a complete tangent for a second, but I want to hear your thoughts on a ranger assassin.
I feel like there is a lot of overlap between rangers and assassins. They're both like kind of stealthy. They both have like one hit that matters a lot. Usually ranger is like an arrow in the right spot. Assassin's usually like a dagger or a knife in the right spot, but like it's usually like one critical hit that like fells their opponent, and they're both sneaky. So like it kind of makes sense that they could easily overlap. But I think like, I guess I feel like assassins like intrinsically are just like tied to knives and daggers and don't really use bows, but
they use bows. Snipers in a lot of games, I guess like I'm thinking like Fire Emblem or like a lot of high fantasy things like Legolas and things like that, like long distance, like longbow snipers.
Yeah, Legolas is a ranger.
Yeah, but he was capable of longbow sniping too, right?
Yeah, but that's just being a good ranger.
Oh, there you go.
A sniper is...
It's a type of assassin.
Harvey
Lee Oswald was a ranger assassin. We're going really off the rails here now. Okay, so let's bring it back to limited talk here. So I guess that's also something we glossed over. 14 versus 15 cards in a booster pack. Obviously, I think we're both on the same page that we hope that they go back to 15 cards in a booster pack, right?
Yeah, I think so. And honestly, after seeing how big of a difference going to 14 from 15 meant, I'd love to try a set with that had 16 in every pack and just see how much more time you get from those 3 extra cards, how many more sideboard options you have. I don't know if it's like feasible for them to do that, but it would be cool to try it. And I know that like the supplemental sets have 10 cards per pack. So like, I guess they can do different pack sizes.
Yeah. The only question would be like, if you put the extra card in the pack, how does that affect like distribution and like box sizes and things like that? Does that change anything? But like, that's a completely different question that we're talking about. But 16 cards in a pack would be interesting. So if there were 16 cards in a pack, then would you take out the token equipment stuff then? Because at a certain point, the more cards you add, the more homogenized decks become, right?
Yeah. Again, I have obviously don't have a lot of experience playing with 16 card packs, but I think it would make sense that they would take out the token equipment. And I think the token equipment was kind of a concession to the 14 card packs and just like also to making sure Icelander wasn't too out of line going first, basically.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I guess I would be inclined to start with not having a token equipment if I was doing 16 card packs, but it's mostly just like, I think it would be a cool thing to try after seeing how much of a difference going down to 14 made.
And then I guess I didn't think about this either. So 14 cards and sealed also is a lot more impactful because then you're getting 6 less cards in order to make a seal pool. Whereas if you go up to 16 cards in a pack, that's 16 more, or sorry, 6 more cards you're getting in a sealed pool. So that could obviously really help alleviate some of like those issues of hitting the specific cards you need for certain strategies in order to like function. So maybe 16 is like the magic number that would kind of like help fix sealed as well.
It'd be interesting to see, I think.
And then I think then also then if you're going 16 cards in a pack, then you would want 4 heroes then too, because like I said, if it was less heroes but 16 cards in a pack, that kind of like could lead to a lot of situations where the 3 heroes are getting everything they want too often in limited. But I think could be balanced out well for 4 heroes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
What about 5 heroes? Do you think they could ever go more than 5 heroes in a limited set, or 4 heroes in a limited set?
It'd be difficult if they did that. It would have to be like a set where it's mostly generics or mostly talent cards that are not like class specific, or the heroes would have to overlap in class. Like there'd be kind of like the other example, but it could be like 3 warriors and 3 ninjas, and then one of them's actually a warrior ninja or something. And then I wouldn't be too worried about it. But with 5 heroes, it's just hard to give if they're using anywhere near the same ratios of cards that are specific to one hero. It'd be really hard to make that work, I think.
There was rumors, I remember when Uprising. I always get Uprising and Dynasty confused for some reason in my mind. Oh, and Uprising was coming out that there was a secret 4th hero, and that it wouldn't necessarily be a token hero. Do you think they could do a draftable hero in a set?
Like at rare or something, or majestic?
Yeah. Like at like I don't think you want to put it at majestic because that might make it like happen too infrequently, but kind of like how Arachne's a rare hero in Uprising. Do you think
Dynasty.
they can just in Dynasty? Do you think they could make it so that a hero is not necessarily like automatically playable, but like you draft your hero as part of the process?
Yeah, I think they could do that. I think that would be pretty cool design space to work with. I think
obviously it couldn't be like too unique. Like you couldn't put like Icelander as like a unique hero in the middle of like outsiders, but as long as it's shared at least like a class and talent system, or like you could even like mix and match. Like maybe there was like a draconic wizard as like a rare hero in Uprising. Like that could have been interesting.
Yeah, I think an easy example is if Bravo Star of the Show was in Tales of Aria Limited, I think that would have been fine. Just like it's not very far outside the line of what's normally happening, but suddenly you're a guardian that gets access to all 3 elements now instead of just 2. And that would slightly change how you draft things. And
that'd be sick. Like imagine like you're like all in on like a Briar deck or whatever in your first 2 packs, and then pack 3 you see like Bravo Star of the Show, and you're like, oh, sweet. And then your opponent passes you ice cards. They're like, you're not on old time. And all of a sudden, like you're like snatching up like ice cards all of pack 3. And then like the whole draft kind of like gets turned on its head because somebody opened up like one of those. I don't know. I don't know if that'd be like good necessarily, but sounds like interesting.
yeah, they'd have to play test the format with the hero and see how it changed things and stuff. But I definitely think it would be reasonable to add a draftable hero to the set. And I think that's just like kind of an example that I think wouldn't be that hard for them to make work. I don't know if it would work if you just slot Bravo into the Tales of Aria packs at rare or majestic in the current draft format, but I think it
Yeah,
would be
like I
fun.
said, I would be hesitant to put it at majestic, but because I wouldn't want the hero to be so pushed that like it's just far and away better than the token heroes. I think it's fine to have it be a little bit better than the token heroes because you don't start with it and it's hard for you to necessarily like plan a whole draft around getting that hero. And then you could do like interesting picks like I don't have this hero yet, but like maybe if I do in like these two marginal picks, I'll take the one that like really, really rewards me if I do get this hero, but doesn't like necessarily super punish me right now. And it is parts like a card that like is like marginal in the first few. Yeah. The more I think about this, the more I think it's really interesting and I hope it happens.
Yeah, and it's not just the cost of like having to open it. You also have to like spend a pick on picking up the hero. So if you're spending a pick in like your pick 1 or pick 2 or even pick 3 taking this hero, that's a pretty big cost compared to taking like a solid playable. At that point, you have to get 30 solid cards to have a good deck. And taking a hero, that's like a pretty big cost, especially if it could be over a pretty good card or an equipment because it's pack or pick 1 or pick 2.
That's fair. And okay. Do you have anything else before I guess about a draftable hero? Because I have another thing I want to talk about now that just popped in my head.
I'm ready for the next thing.
Okay, Phoenix Flames. Phoenix Flames. So token cards that aren't cracked bubble that you can put in your deck. How did you feel about Phoenix Flames?
So
'Cause-
I want to say that I really liked how Fi played. Not, I don't like Fi mirrors, but I think like the hero design is pretty cool, and I like that their like strong linear aggro decks have looked reasonably different and have different play patterns, despite the fact that they're just like throwing more damage at each other. So I really like Fi's design, and that kind of required Phoenix Flames to exist in tokens or somehow. But I didn't love the concept, and I also like the fact that they had to design so many of the draconic talent, like draconic classless cards around Phoenix Flame, and Dromai doesn't even want to put Phoenix Flames in her deck. I think that led to a really weird spot, and I can't say I loved it, I guess.
yeah, and it also felt like it kind of let Fi have a lower threshold of playable cards because at that point then you only had to get to 28, 27 playable good cards in order to have like a good like Fi deck. And I think like maybe one is okay in a Dromai deck if you have like burnaways or like other cards that can kind of like help you use the Phoenix Flame, but it's obviously not a card you want 3 of in Dromai by any means, especially given that it doesn't block. And then obviously Icelander, you just had to get 30 old Icelander cards in order to make Icelander work. So I kind of put this interesting dynamic as far as like draft strategies and what you had to think about when drafting in order to, I guess, have functional decks at the end, because nobody wants the other token that's always allowed for everybody, which is Crack Bobble. So
Yeah. I guess in Dromai, it felt slightly better than Cracked Bobble. In Fi, I actively wanted to in a lot of my Fi decks. If I had 1 or 2 copies of Flame Call Awakening, I'd be very happy to put the second Phoenix Flame in my deck. And Icelander didn't have access to it. So,
yeah, and Fi had the whole piece of equipment that rewarded you for having Phoenix Flames on the combat chain with Heat Wave. Yeah, I knew it was Heat something, but Heat Wave, thank you. So, like, even if you had 3, if you get them all on the same combat chain somehow, or just even having 2 on the combat chain, that's getting you 2 damage out of your piece of equipment in limited, which is pretty good.
Yeah, it's a Goliath Gauntlet. One of the best equipment in Welcome to Wraith.
Yeah, true. I mean, but like, I guess we could talk about that. Like, how do you feel about the equipment design overall in limited? And like, I guess we talked about Arcane Barrier, but what about just like overall? How do you think like equipment has been designed for limited?
So I really liked Icelander's 3 pieces of equipment. I think the
It's weird she didn't get shoes, but yeah.
The chess piece with the conditional 1 resource that you can only use on your opponent's turn, you can't use it on your turn. It had Arcane Barrier on it, so it was like very broken in the Icelander mirror, but I think it felt like a good power level that I like against both Dromai and Fi. Same with Sash of Sandakai, where it's 1 resource, but it's conditional. And Sash still ended up being like a super high pick, but I think it feels much more in line than something like Heart and Crossstrap, where you sacrifice and you get 2 off the cost of your next attack. Or even Deep Blue, I think, was reasonably more powerful than either of these equipment in terms of how many resources it produced. And I kind of like the slightly toned back equipment. Even it's still very powerful and it's still frequently an early pick or even a pick 1, but it's definitely weaker than some of the old equipment.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Deep Blue's the most egregious piece of like common equipment we've seen, just because of how far above and away it was in power level to like any other piece of equipment at common in that set. Just the ability to like turn any of like your awkward hands into functional hands that now have access to resources for just the cost of 1 equipment. And then like you would have to have pitched that card anyways. It goes to the bottom of your deck was just like so much more powerful than any other piece of like equipment in that set. Although I guess like the second runner up was the Earth Hat that let you like turn a blue into your hand into an Earth card at instant speed. That card was like really good in like the right situations.
Yeah, I think that card is a much better place to concentrate power, like your power budget to, I guess, if that makes sense. Like this card is really powerful, but you have to build around it. You need like situationally very good Earth cards that like, maybe not situation, but you'd have to have good Earth cards to use it, and you have to get them in your graveyard before it does anything. And on top of that, there's like a lot of like decision making in terms of when you use it. There's a lot of like thinking, and like better players will be able to get more value out of their hat a lot of the time when that's their hat. And I think that's like a good spot to have a powerful piece of equipment where like the difference between using it optimally and using it maybe in not the right spot isn't as clear as something like Deep Blue, where you're like, wow, my hand's all red and I have a 2 cost with Go Again and a 1 cost that I want to play, or a 2 cost with Go Again and a Rosetta Thorn I want to swing.
Yeah.
So I think that's a much better spot for having strong equipment.
Okay. How do you feel about the legendary equipment in Limited? I think that's kind of, it doesn't come up very often, but when it does, it can be a real feel bad, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that the way, like, legendary equipment's kind of more of a concession to constructed than limited. And I think that sometimes your opponent, you sit down and they have Flamescale Furnace or Crown of Providence or even Tiger Stripe Shiko, and it's stupid. Or you sit down for the Icelander Mirror and they have Alluvian Constellus, and you're just like, okay,
that was the one that
I
was thinking of in particular, yeah.
And that kind of, I want to touch on another thing with Alluvian Constellus, but first, I think that legendary equipment being not balanced for limited, I think is fine, and you're going to get some wins that are like you wouldn't have been able to win with any other card because you have legendary equipment. And I don't think that's great, but I think that it is a concession worth making for having good and cool equipment for constructed.
That's fair.
What do you think about that?
So I don't know how much better, obviously they're better, but it very rarely feels like, oh, you have a legendary piece of equipment, I can't win. Or like you have like, I think maybe it's worth like 5 percentage points roughly, I guess, if I had to give like a rough quantitative guess off the top of my head, like between Sutcliffe Suede Hides, I guess I'm thinking of, and Spellbound Creepers. I don't think there was a major difference in that limited format. Like most of the time, 1 action point is really all you really need, and they both kind of cost a resource. So I don't think like that particular piece of legendary equipment doesn't make a huge resource. I think Crown of Providence is fine. It gets you 2 life and lets you filter a card. It's a very good effect, but it's not like egregious. I feel like I think it's just a good reward, but decks can obviously still outvalue that, and a better deck overall will still handily beat a card like Crown of Providence. Like it's just not going to matter. I think the pieces of equipment that are like the most problematic are like Valiant Dynamo, or what's the legendary chess piece for Bravo in Welcome to Wraith? Tectonic Plating, or Scabskin Leathers and stuff like that. The ones that let you block a lot and get like recursive value, I think those wind up being the most problematic like legendaries as far as limited goes, and Luvian Constellus definitely falls into that category if you want to go off on a Luvian Constellus now.
So it's not just the Luvian Constellus. I think like the idea of sideboard equipment is just pretty bad because first off, it's hard to use. It's hard to spend a lot of picks on equipment. Like sometimes you need 2 chests or 2 boots or whatever if one of them's a sideboard piece. Like there's definitely times where I was playing Dromai and I had my Silent Stilettos, and I'm also like, I kind of want this Quelling Slippers because it's much better against Fi. I'm never using the Silent Stilettos against Fi. And I think that just isn't great for the draft format, especially with how high equipment are picked. And then jumping back to Tales of Aria also, even if it's an equipment that's useless in one matchup and good in the other two, like something like Runaways in that format, I think is also just not great for the game.
Yeah, I would agree. And I guess in Aria, there was, like we said, the one piece of equipment, Heart of Ice, that actually had Arcane Barrier, and its activated ability was almost non-existently like useful. Like I guess maybe you can activate it against Oldhim if you wanted to, but like it's not like super impactful. But just the fact like it was the only way to get Arcane Barrier at Legendary, and like that could really matter against Briar, especially if you're playing Oldhim, just being able to like block both like the one Earth card that pings
Bramble Spark.
Bramble Spark, or random ball lightning effects that are pushed, or repeatedly absorb 1 more damage off of Rosetta Thorn's wings, I think is very, very impactful. And I think it was like not great to lock that card behind Legendary in that format. But
yeah, I don't like. Again, I think this is like specifically a sideboard card for Briar, and against everyone else, it's Iron Rot Chest, which I don't think is, again, a very good spot for equipment to be, where it's just good against some people and useless against others.
Yeah, I guess if we look at like what like the generic damage mitigation effects were, so we started with Iron Rot and Welcome to Wraith. Mm-hmm. I don't remember what was in Arcane Rising, but it doesn't matter.
It just had the Null Rune.
Null Rune, okay, that's weird. Then we had Ironhide and Monarch. We just kind of had random, not really a lot of damage mitigation in Tales of Aria, and then we had Quell in Uprising. Which one of those do you think is like the best designed, or like which one of those do you feel like had the most impact in like the format?
Yeah, I think Iron Rot was pretty good. I think is a good balance between blocking physical and arcane damage, that because you can't really have Iron Rot in a format that has a wizard and expect it to be good. But I guess Arcane Rising also had Null Rune in a format that some characters didn't do arcane damage, and I think that was also not good either. So I think I liked Iron Rot better than Ironhide, especially because Monarch had not a lot of ways to use resources on your opponent's turn, and the characters that did have it, I think Prism could pretty well, but not really anyone else. And I think that's not I don't like that imbalance where the generic equipment is so much better in one hero than the others. And I guess though, between Quell and Iron Rot, I don't know which one I like better. I think they were both pretty good.
Okay. Do you think you could ever have just like more battle worn equipment? So that kind of would raise the power level of like the format overall. And I think in Welcome to Wraith, like all the classes have like common battle worn pieces of equipment. But would you like to see like maybe like a generic piece of battle worn equipment that maybe had like a marginal effect?
Yeah, I think that would be cool. The marginal effect would have to be not super strong. Like maybe it's a headpiece that blocks. I was thinking like
maybe just give a Cracker Jack's battle worn.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That does kind of push the equipment into being really strong again, where you're getting 2 points of value on equipment. But a generic equipment, that's probably just like something you'd first pick almost always. But I think like something like a hat that has Battle Worn 1 and then has Ragamuffin's ability or something would be perfectly fine for limited.
Yeah. So I guess is Deep Blue 3 value off of uh, piece of equipment, or is it one value for the effect of a card? Or like, how do you value Deep Blue in terms of like rate?
So the way I value Deep Blue is like the turn you are using it, you are turning a card that would pitch for 1 resource into a card that pitches for 3 resources. So it's worth 2 resources, basically.
So it has a value of 2, basically. So very good piece of equipment.
And I think like part of the biggest reason Deep Blue is so powerful is first, there weren't any good chests other than Deep Blue in the format, I'm pretty sure. There was Code of Frost, but Code of Frost is not great because you didn't know when the Frostbite would matter and your opponent got to see it before they made their blocks. They knew you were activating it. And then it also was...
Most of the time you'd want to activate Code of Frost on turn 0, right? So you just like, you're on the, you go first, you just activate your Code of Frost, give them a Frostbite to slow down their turn 1, and then you Arsenal card and pass. Like that was its like best case scenario, right?
I'm not sure what the best case scenario for it is, because I felt like a lot of the time I did that. A lot of heroes couldn't spend 4 cards anyway, or a lot of the time they might not be able to spend the 4 cards anyway. Like Lexi can still only load 1 arrow and fire 1 arrow, so it really depended on her hand and the hands. But I didn't love Code of Frosting on turn 0. I just like kind of like would randomly use it at some point towards the middle of the game where I'm like, maybe this will make a difference here since they want to block with something and then play something. And yeah.
Okay.
But I can't remember where I was going before we talked about Code of Frost.
Generic chess pieces in Tales of Aria, or chess pieces in Tales of Aria Limited. Deep Blue was the best one because Code of Frost was the other one, and then we talked about use cases of Code of Frost.
Okay.
If that rings any bells. If not, we can move on.
I think we can move on. I lost whatever I was thinking.
Okay. Do you have any final, I guess, thoughts, feelings, hopes for Outsiders, I guess, before we wrap things up then?
Yeah, so you kind of talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but I really hope we see some limited callings. I hope this format is designed with sealed in mind and has a good sealed format as well as a good draft format, and we get to see some limited callings. And Welcome to Wraith was perfect because it had a good sealed format and a good draft format. And I think Rhinar was the worst, but it wasn't by a lot. And there's also been other people saying that other heroes are the worst and stuff. But yeah, I think
some people say Katsu's the worst in Welcome to Wraith somehow. I guess we thought that for a long time, and then we were like, oh wait, you can actually make Katsu really well.
Because I think Katsu kind of comes across as being the worst because all 3 of the other weapons are kind of above rate in one way or another, and Katsu's is just 1 resource for 1 damage, but it kind of has evasion, and it's really good at using random excess resources, and it ends up being pretty strong once you know how to play Katsu, I guess, or learn all the things you can do outside of just like the combo lines are all strong, and then like the things you can do outside of the combo lines are also pretty strong. So
yeah, and his hero ability allowing you to like tutor up the cards for the combo lines helps smooth out his consistency too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm going to get out my little soapbox here. I'm just going to plop it down. I'm going to get on my soapbox. My biggest pet peeve in Limited is when people say sealed is a luck-based format based on what you open. That is wrong. It's especially wrong in draft, but it's very wrong about sealed, and it's one of the biggest criticisms I hear about sealed, and I hate it. I hate it so much. Sealed is intrinsically a person's ability to evaluate a pool of resources and maximize them. That's what it is. And especially in a game like Flesh and Blood, there's no like, I guess there are very few instances of cards that your opponent just can't deal with or win the game as soon as they're played. That might have been a bigger issue in games like Magic, where like, oh, this just one mythic rare is unbeatable. It's like the Scarab God, you can't kill it. It gets recursive value turn after turn after turn. You drop it on the battlefield, you win the game. Like that feels bad and it's sealed and takes away from some of the skill level. But like in Flesh and Blood, you still have to like look at like your available resources, your pool, your, I guess, like your attack actions, your non-attack actions, what hero strategy you want to use. There's so many different layers that you have to consider when you're opening up just like 6 booster packs that like I think it's really rewarding and engaging in this game. And when done right, is not at all just like a luck based thing. It's just one of the most skill intensive things you can do in the game. And I think even in a format of like Tales of Aria, like I think I lost 1 game of Sealed. And did you lose it all in Sealed during the Swiss rounds, Michael?
Yeah, I lost to Tark.
Oh, okay, well that checks out. But like, and like that could have, people could easily say like, oh yeah, that's just all about like how good of a pool of like Briar you opened, where like that's some of it, but there are opportunities to play other heroes. And even when you just open up like a Briar pool, maximizing it, knowing what cards are good and what cards are bad, and understanding like actually how to construct the deck with what you're given is super skill intensive. And that's why Sealed is actually like my favorite way to play like most games. I just really love that aspect of Sealed. So I can get off my soapbox now.
Yeah, I think that's one thing we have in common, and that we both really love Sealed, and we've played a lot of Sealeds together because I think Sealed's probably the most like naturally skill testing version of playing a card game. Like Constructed, a lot of it is like learning the reps, learning the matchups, learning how to sideboard, learning what gameplay sequences look like. And then Draft, there is a lot of skill in Draft, and you make a lot of calculated risks and stuff. But Sealed, you have all of the pieces here. You get to make all of the decisions based on like complete information, which puts it in like kind of unique spot compared to Draft, where you're building a deck out of all the tools in front of you rather than taking calculated risks. You're instead just, what is the most efficient thing I can do with all of this? And I really agree with what you said about Sealed. I think that I kind of came around on this idea back in the Magic days. I heard at one point that pros have a higher, or the highest win rate in Sealed day 1 of Grand Prix, which kind of surprised me at first, but then I realized, like, I kind of learned how Sealed, it's the potential to like take a Sealed pool and make the best thing possible with it. It's pretty hard to do that consistently, do that every time. And it does help to have bombs and powerful cards that are above rate or whatever, but it's a pretty unique puzzle every time you sit down, and the skill it takes to build the best pool is a lot higher than I feel like a lot of the community really gives it credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. And like you said, hopefully we get some sweet Sealed Grand Prix this year, or sorry,
Callings.
Hopefully, like you said, we get some sweet Sealed callings this year, and we can show off just how much of a low variance Sealed is and just crush day 1 again.
Hopefully.
But I guess that wouldn't be any different than any other format of a tournament for you, so.
We say this, but I like 2-3 drops day 1.
It's a high variance format, don't worry about it.
I'm also like, I know that Uprising Sealed wasn't the best, but I was also still kind of sad we didn't get to play any Uprising Sealed at competitive level.
What about 7 packs Uprising Sealed? Do you think that would like just give it 1 more pack?
I don't know. I didn't really play a lot of Uprising Sealed in our games.
We'll do some 7-pack Uprising Sealed and we'll let everybody know.
In our games, I always felt like it was Icelander versus Fi, and both heroes were very strong. And then I know there was like one Sealed Battle Hardened where apparently it was all Fi everywhere. And I'm like, why aren't these people just playing Icelander and killing the Fis?
Yeah, well, you feel that way every time somebody doesn't play Icelanders.
Yeah, Icelander's sweet. You just give them a frostbite. They're like, oh no, I'm dead. I got a frostbite.
I can't do anything anymore.
Brain freeze them, put their blue on top, or put their red on top. Whatever they needed, put it on top.
Easy game.
And you scar for a scar them, and then you find us fighting spirit them. I love Icelander.
Yeah, so much of that's exactly what we do in Classic Constructed as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's just good.
Any final thoughts then, Michael?
I feel like I could talk about Limited for
I'm sure
a lot longer than this podcast. I don't know if I have anything pressing or super related, but I'm just like, I really like limited, and I hope it stays a large part in Flesh and Blood. And honestly, I really hope it's more a part of next year's Flesh and Blood than it was of 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess with that being said, the next time you're building a sealed pool or drafting in your local draft pod, always remember, mind your manners. Thanks for listening.